Picture your hands in the dark, close to a small fire, holding a piece of mammoth tusk. You have been carving for hours, shaping the same figure your grandmother once shaped, and her mother before her. Wide hips, a heavy belly, no face, no feet. It is a shape you know by heart. You could carve it with your eyes closed. Your father carved it. His father carved it. Nobody remembers who carved it first. You have never left this valley. You have never met the people who live beyond the mountains to the east. And yet, thousands of miles away, someone you will never meet is carving the exact same figure. Same proportions. Same missing face. Same idea, carried in stone and ivory, across a distance neither of you could ever walk in one lifetime. No phones. No roads. No writing. And somehow, this one image kept showing up, again and again, across an entire continent. Today, an image can cross the planet before you have even finished your coffee. One person posts it, and by lunch, a version of it is everywhere, remixed, reposted, turned into a meme with a caption nobody remembers writing. We call that going viral. We assume it needs the internet to happen. We assume that kind of spread is new, a byproduct of fiber optic cables and satellites circling overhead. But tens of thousands of years before Wi-Fi, before the wheel, before a single word was ever written down, something almost identical was already happening. Groups of humans, separated by entire mountain ranges, by generations, by lifetimes of walking, were creating the same design. Not a similar design. The same one. No trade routes connected them. No shared language existed between them. In many cases, hundreds of years passed between one carving and the next. And still, somehow, the image traveled. Archaeologists call these objects Venus figurines. It is not the most accurate name. These carvings have nothing to do with the Roman goddess. She would not even exist for tens of thousands of years after the last one was made. But the name stuck. Today, it describes more than 200 small statuettes, found scattered from Western Europe all the way to Siberia. Most were carved between roughly 40,000 and 10,000 years ago, during the depths of the last ice age. They turn up in the Pyrenees and southwest France, along the Rhine and the Danube in Central Europe, and across southern Russia, all the way to Siberia. 3 regions, thousands of miles apart, each producing their own version of the same basic idea. Look closely at enough of them, and a pattern jumps out immediately. Wide hips, full breasts, a rounded stomach, small, often faceless heads, arms that barely exist, feet that were never carved at all. Over and over, across an entire ice age, across an entire continent, that same body shape keeps returning. One of the oldest known examples is the Venus of Hohlfels, discovered in a cave in southern Germany. Researchers estimate it is somewhere between 35 and 40,000 years old. Carved from the ivory of a woolly mammoth, small enough to close in one fist. It has no head at all. Just a small carved loop where a face should be, which suggests someone once wore this figure around their neck, close to their body, for reasons we can only guess at. Then there is the Venus of Willendorf, unearthed near a small Austrian village in 1908. Roughly 30,000 years old, carved from limestone. She was once coated head to toe in red ochre, a deep, blood-colored pigment that took real effort to prepare and apply. And here is a detail that rarely makes it into the textbooks. That limestone was not local. It came from roughly 400 miles away, somewhere near northern Italy. Which means someone carried this stone, or the finished figure itself, across mountains, long before it ever reached the riverbank where it was found. These 2 figures alone are separated by thousands of years and hundreds of miles. There is a 3rd figure worth knowing, found further east in the Czech Republic at a site called Dolní Věstonice. It is roughly 27 to 29,000 years old. And it is not carved from stone or ivory at all. It is fired clay, shaped by hand and baked in an open fire, which makes it one of the oldest known ceramic objects on the entire planet. Roughly 14,000 years before anyone, anywhere, thought to fire clay into pottery you could actually use. In other words, somewhere in an Ice Age village, someone invented an entirely new material just to keep making this same figure. And they still share the same basic language of form. Now stretch that pattern even further east. Near Lake Baikal in Siberia, at a site called Malta, archaeologists uncovered nearly 30 more figurines, dated to about 23,000 years ago. They are thousands of miles from Willendorf. A different climate, a different landscape, a different group of people entirely. And yet the core idea is unmistakably related. Even as the details shift, some Siberian figures show carved clothing, even faces, details their Western cousins almost never include. So here is the real question, the one that has kept archaeologists arguing for over a century. How does the same core image appear on opposite ends of a continent, across thousands of years, among people who almost certainly never met? Start with what is missing. There is no trade network on record stretching from France to Siberia. No sign of one culture marching outward, imposing its art on everyone else. Just small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, most of them never traveling more than a few hundred miles from where they were born. Some archaeologists picture something slower. A kind of cultural telephone, passed from valley to valley, generation to generation, over centuries. An idea drifting outward the way smoke drifts through a forest, thinning as it goes, but never fully disappearing. One group shows a neighboring group. That group shows the next. Repeat that for 100 generations, and a shape could genuinely cross a continent. It is a good theory. It is also not a complete one. Because a slow drift like that should blur the details over time and distance. Rounder here, sharper there, a face added, a face lost. And yet the core shape barely changes, even 3,000 miles from where it started. That is the part that still keeps researchers up at night. This remains one of the genuinely unresolved questions in Ice Age archaeology. Not a mystery invented for a headline. An actual, open debate among the people who study this for a living. And that honesty is exactly why we made this video in the first place. Not to hand you a neat, tidy answer, but to show you how strange and how real this evidence actually is. That is the standard here. Real sources, real research, no invented answers just to make a clean ending. If that is the kind of history you want in your feed, subscribing means you will not miss the next one. Now, back to the figures themselves. Because the debate over what they actually meant is just as fascinating as the mystery of how they spread. The oldest and most popular theory is that these were fertility symbols. Carved to represent successful childbirth, healthy pregnancy, or the survival of a growing family. Given how many of the figures emphasize the stomach, hips, and breasts, this reading makes intuitive sense on the surface. Others go further, reading these as mother goddess figures. Early representations of a life-giving, protective female power, honored in some form we no longer fully understand. A third camp moves away from religion entirely. To them, these were markers of identity or status, small portable symbols that said something about who a person was within their group. And then there is a more practical reading, almost educational. The idea that these figures were used to teach, passed down within a community as a kind of visual knowledge about pregnancy and the female body. For very different explanations. And here is where it gets genuinely interesting. In 2011, researchers actually tested one of these ideas directly. A study by Dixon and Dixon asked participants to rate a set of figurines for attractiveness, age, and whether they appeared pregnant. If the fertility and attractiveness theory were fully correct, you would expect the curviest figures to be rated the most attractive. Instead, the opposite happened. Most of the figures with the widest hip-to-waist proportions actually received low attractiveness scores. Most were also judged to represent middle-aged or young adult women. Not the youngest, most fertile stage of life you might expect from a pure fertility symbol. So the researchers proposed something different. During a brutal ice age, simply surviving into middle age after childbirth would have been rare and remarkable. Maybe these figures were not celebrating beauty or sexuality at all. Maybe they were expressions of hope. Small, carved wishes for survival, longevity, and a body that had made it through. No single theory here has been proven. Archaeologists still disagree, openly, in published papers, decades apart. Some researchers have said plainly that we may never know the true meaning behind these figures. And that is a genuinely uncomfortable thing to admit in a field built on finding answers. But that disagreement is not a failure. It is honesty. It means nobody is pretending to know more than the evidence actually allows. Which brings us to the bigger picture. The part that matters more than picking a single correct theory. Whatever these figures actually meant, their existence proves something remarkable about Ice Age humans. They were capable of sharing a deep, specific, symbolic idea across enormous populations. Without writing, without direct contact, without a single common language between them. That is not a small thing. That is one of the earliest signs we have of humans thinking beyond their own immediate group. But it is worth being honest about the nuance here too. This is not a story of one single culture stretching from France to Siberia. The figures vary. Some are carved from ivory, others from limestone, others from clay fired in a hearth. Some, like the ones from Siberia, show clothing and detailed faces. Others, like Willendorf and Holfels, are deliberately faceless, almost anonymous. So this is not one culture copying itself across a continent. It looks more like a shared instinct. An idea that different, unconnected groups of humans kept arriving at, independently, again and again. The same way separate cultures, with no contact at all, have each independently invented the bow, the needle, or the wheel. And that might be the most human part of this entire story. Long before anyone could write a single sentence, before anyone could leave a note explaining what they meant, people were already finding ways to carve meaning into something permanent. They wanted the next person, whoever that might be, however far away, to understand something without a single word being spoken. Ice Age humans were building shared meaning long before they had any way to write it down. No satellites, no shipping routes, no alphabet. Just an idea, small enough to fit in a hand, carried from fire to fire, valley to valley, for tens of thousands of years. That is a longer run than almost anything humans have made since. So here is the question worth sitting with. Of the four theories we walked through today, fertility, mother goddess, status, or teaching tool, which one actually convinces you? Or do you think the real answer is something none of us have thought of yet? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the best explanations I have heard for these figures came from viewers, not academics.